Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started out at procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. And on this week's show, we are taking a look into the transformation of the oil and gas industry and the leading role that procurement can play. I'm joined by two guests today, Artem Sherekh, Global Oil and Gas Practice Lead at SAP, and Ferhat Eryurt, a partner at Apsolut Group. Headquartered in Germany, Apsolut is an SAP and SAP Ariba consulting partner for delivering on-premise, cloud, and hybrid procurement solutions. Now, in our conversation, we discussed the transformation occurring within the oil and gas industry and how companies are looking to evolve into broader chemicals and energy organizations, and discussed the role that procurement can play in becoming a strategic partner in this transformation. We dive deeper, more specifically then, into sustainability, which has become a huge strategic imperative for companies in this space. So let's begin, and I start by asking Ferhat if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I was searching for procurement because I was interested to learn more about markets, prices, and the mechanisms. And so therefore I was seeking for a procurement role. But with the time, I'm also getting more and more obsessed with the procurement, I would say. So in the end, I'm in now procurement supply chain for more than 15 years.
And Artem, how about you? How did you find procurement, or did procurement find you?
In my case, that was the second one. So yeah. I think that procurement find me finally, because I was always in sales and marketing for I guess around 25 years. So I started when I was in university, like a student in sales in the organization. But 5 years ago, so in SAP, my previous manager suggested me to join the procurement team, and I said no for the first time because my thoughts was that the procurement is the most boring function in the company. And then so I got another proposal, a second one, so to join the procurement team. And finally I joined, and I already had 5 years in business development and sales of procurement solution in SAP. But that, most exciting time, I guess, for the last 15 years in SAP.
So what were some of those perceptions of procurement that weren't the reality when you decided to come over to the dark side?
So at the beginning, I thought that historically, my grandfather was chief of procurement officer and in oil and gas company, and he told me a lot of stories, but it was always around. So I need to buy things, this and this and this and this, and always it was connected to several problems. So was one supplier did not deliver, another one did not deliver, and always is urgent and so on and so on. And based on this history, I decided that it's really boring. So you have to buy something, and suppliers don't want to deliver something on time, and that was really funny. But the reality is absolutely different. Of course, that it's really complicated things and complicated functions, and that's why it became so interesting for me.
Well, I know we're going to talk, mostly focus our conversation today actually on the oil and gas industry. So just for context, Artem, you talked about your grandfather being a chief procurement officer in oil and gas. Can you talk a little bit about kind of, I guess that's come in the family. Like what's your experience? How do you come to oil and gas, and what experience have you had within the oil and gas industry?
So my experience, I think I started when I was child. So first of all, my grandfather worked in the oil and gas company. Then my father worked also in oil and gas industry. And I spent with this lot of history and stories around oil and gas, the whole childhood. And then I worked because, the Russia is oil and gas country. and I worked a lot with the oil and gas companies, because you know that we have a Gazprom, Lukoil. It's one of the biggest companies in the world, and mostly I work like a partner. Sometimes like a consulting, sometimes like a sales, sometimes like a business development manager from SAP side. And I know quite well at the moment procurement in oil and gas.
And Ferhat, I want to ask the same question to you as well, just to kind of round out the context for listeners. How did you find yourself in oil and gas?
I think oil and gas markets are the most interesting one. And if you think about energy, about transportation, and about the daily life, it's was always a market which was putting my attention to it. And I also have a family background. So the thing is that Artem comes from the oil and gas industry, and my, let's say, parents and also the relatives worked in the plastics industry. So therefore, I was always keen to understand how this materials is made up, and of course about the raw materials. And I saw that there are lots of international connections and topics which really, I believe at that time, is something I really wanted to be a part of it. So that was why I'm seeking also procurement. And then I started industry for oil and gas based raw materials, did a lot of strategic projects in the hotspots and in the world. And afterwards, always staying connected to the basic oil and gas value chains, bringing me today to the position here at Absolut.
So, Ferhat, right now we talk a lot about positioning procurement as a business partner across industry, really, not just in oil and gas. But I just wonder if you could share, as companies are under, specifically, I think in oil and gas, a lot of internal and external pressure to, in terms of their operations. How can procurement help them rise to the challenges? Like, what's the role of procurement in oil and gas, do you see?
Well, I think if we just look at the markets and also the transformation the energy industry is going through, especially oil and gas, we have to reassess the value of procurement. So for the time being, it was a very strong debate about optimizing processes, going for digitalization, training the team, also reviewing the overall structure. But what happens now is that oil and gas companies are forced to go to a transformation. So that also brings some transformation works for the procurement itself. And as a major contributor to that story, procurement has now to be agile in view of changing suppliers, reviewing supply markets, and also the way how it how they procure in the future. So, for example, on a strategic level, if you have an oil and gas company today, which is going now for an energy supplier based on wind energy, for example, the procurement of all the wind energy requirements is different to that what you have been, for example, on exploration or in drilling. So this means that you have to train your team, you have to prepare also your processes, but also find new suppliers. So we are in a very exciting era where we have to continue and maintain the current focus while we have to grow from the procurement in order to support the sustainability of our organization, but also competitive advantage. So I think this is a really interesting time, Phil. And I see that some organizations are reacting to that, but I also perceive that some organizations still need to adapt to these challenges.
It's interesting that the whole business model is changing. As you alluded to there, as the example of buying different alternative sources of energy as an example. Artem, you get to see obviously cross industry as well, and what some organizations are doing versus what other organizations are doing. Would you say that right now is a time when oil and gas companies across the industry are really starting to embrace transformation?
So from my point of view, yes. So they have to do this, and as you can see, so all oil and gas company at the moment, like in transition period, some of them would like to become energy company, and some of them would like to become chemical company.
Right.
And so I work with different CPOs. So you know that we have an SAP like CPO think tank, and me personally work with 10 CPOs. from different oil and gas company. For example, OMV is it's also our customer and absolute customer, and they became more chemical company. Another company in France, Engie, they became more energy company, and that's maybe the reason that that oil and gas company, they have to transform, because at the moment the price for existing energy is quite low, but green energy is really expensive. And at the same time, the company have to support existing function and existing production, but at the same time investing in new technologies and in new functions. And that's, how to say, quite complicated, because at the same time in this transition period you have to support sustainability level, and that's also quite complicated. And procurement, I think that from procurement depends a lot of things, because sustainability and new equipment, new technologies, new everything new. So, and procurement have to deliver, for example, the equipment for the new technologies, or have to bring new technologies. That's quite complicated, I would say. That's why they need to transform and maybe do more simple things.
And what I would like to add, Phil, on that is that if we come from the sales and marketing perspective, so there is a limited growth potential for you in the oil and gas sector. So the demand, of course, will sustain in the next years, but we also see that the curve will drop down. So there is not this big hype of let's sell more and more, and procurement is getting that story smaller and just a service unit. The change, like Artem has described it, for diversification, for changing also backward and forward integration in the value chain, also leads to a new focus on procurement, which the sales and marketing team cannot deliver on their own. So you need to support from the supply market and from the supply chain in order to fulfill your strategic targets. And this is something which is very interesting, because in the last years we debated a lot of how to increase the value of procurement, and it was somehow an discussion which was limited to just the power in the organization to speak up. Now it turns, and this energy transition brings you a completely new sphere where you need different mindsets, different understanding of the markets, and where you also have a big say in the future of the business.
Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating time. So as you were going from this oil and gas industry that sounds like it's fracturing between energy and chemicals, depending on where the strategy of each company is, to diversify, and so you kind of changing out the parts on the plane while it's flying, so to speak.
Correct.
And it's not necessarily about, okay, how do we optimize for the now, get cost savings to make ourselves more profitable now, as much as how can we help our entire organization transition? And with that transition comes a brand new supply base, a brand new supply chain. And that's kind of the key role. I'm thinking about where procurement can play and where procurement can talk about their value proposition in a different way.
And I think this is an interesting, and there's a bunch of different implications, Phil, to that story, because how you can increase the buying power, or how you can increase the know-how in your buying department. It can be that, of course, you train the people and you go for digitization, which maybe is one of the key homeworks you need to do for this endeavor. But it's also what we see in the market is stronger M&A activities, stronger new, let's say, focus on maybe some innovations, some startups. And this brings also the challenge that you need to melt this into one organization, or you accept the fragmentation for a while and just seek maybe for, let's say, the specific optimization where you just have the highest urgency.
Yeah.
And that's a big challenge for the organization today, because if you look to oil and gas procurement, if you would say, look, let's go and buy 100 of different chemicals with a small amount in compared to the oil and gas production, you would maybe have today a big serious problem in order to find someone who can adequately really perform that service.
As you're thinking about, and Artem, I want to ask you this question because I think it's really interesting, giving you a background outside of procurement. So as we're talking to CEOs, COOs, senior executives within the oil and gas industry about the procurement value proposition, how do we change the narrative? From it being what you talked about, your perception of procurement before you got inside of procurement. I'm sure that perception is what a lot of folks who are in senior leadership positions within oil and gas think about procurement. How do we change that perception so that the executives look at procurement as somebody who can bring a little bit more value than that?
So that's exciting question, and I would say maybe I will tell to C-level manager maybe 5 things. First of all, the procurement function anyway at the moment in transformation, and due to, for example, even during our COVID time, that sometimes the supply chain was fully disruptive, and I have a lot of cases when the maintenance or even production has stopped due to supply chain.
Yeah.
And this is very important today to deliver all products and services to the company, and procurement is responsible for this. But what is interesting that procurement became an innovation partner of the company, because they see all suppliers, they see innovations, and they can bring the innovative supplier to the company, and based on this, the company could save the money. Another thing that procurement today is could work like sustainability manager, because we could talk about scope 1 and scope 2 emission, which usually produced by company, but scope 3 emission is fully dependent on suppliers, and only procurement work with suppliers. Also, what is interesting that procurement is the partner for the R&D. Any R&D function in the company, they ask procurement, so could you please deliver this kind of products or this kind of services? Could you find this solution? Could you find this solution? Because from procurement depends all these things, and I would say that sometimes R&D are successful due to procurement functions. And another thing, so what I would like to highlight might be that procurement became a partner manager. So I know the cases when investments can go from procurement to any startups. And even I have a cases that our customer in Hungary, CPO, owned this investment budget, and CPO could invest in some startups to deliver innovation to the company. And that's 4 or 5 areas which previously you never been before in procurement. Right. So procurement was responsible only to buy and deliver, sometimes only to buy. But today it's procurement became a partner of the company, became partner of the board, I would say, due to this many functions.
I think what is important is that's a self-criticism. What I would say as a part of the procurement community is that we need to stop the debate about how we can get a chair at the board table. Right. We need to just go on the ground and analyze where is our value contribution. And this sounds like a quite simple task, but I think in view of the challenges we have, we need to reevaluate our positioning and speak up that this is the requirements we have from the market, and this is the best force to drive change. And I think we have also, from the procurement part, also a change in our mindset, how we view the supply markets, because we are also trained to look at the price, the quality, and we are often reacting to sudden, let's say, supply issues. Look, today the debate we have in Los Angeles port about all the discussion in supply chains about chip. We need to have more foresight in the way how we look into procurement markets and supply chain, because these type of issues which we face today, they are also distracting us from our strategic path. Of course, we have to respond to that challenges, but Phil, what I want to urge is that we need to have some detachment of the urgent issues on a day-to-day business, looking more to the sustainability and the strategic positioning in markets and internally. I think that's the topic I would like to urge.
Yeah, it's that really closely connecting what you're doing and what you're focusing on with the true needs of the business. Which is something we talk a lot about at Art of Procurement for sure. And that then helps make sure you're focusing in the right areas, and the impact that you have is impact that the business actually wants, not what you think as a procurement team that the business wants. I wonder, I'm thinking for those organizations, Artem, that are a little bit less mature in terms of their procurement capability from an oil and gas perspective, and they don't necessarily have access to the data that they need, as an example, to start to understand even where the current spend is, never mind how to impact future spend. When you're working with organizations that don't have that much of an infrastructure from a digital perspective, where do they start, or where do you encourage them to start so they can begin to at least go on that journey to become more impactful?
Very good question. So usually we always, but you was absolutely right. So we talked to our CPOs, and in one of the discussion we just mentioned the main issues in procurement organization, and one of them was really data, then architecture, and one of the main questions, of course, to discuss today is sustainability. But you remember that the first they said that this is a data. Because and one of the CPO mentioned, it was Klaus Blachnik from OMV, that sometimes it's harder to get the data inside of the company than outside.
Right.
Because the company has a huge history, a lot of changes with the system, and so on, so on. So we, I think it's my personal opinion at the moment that, so I would recommend to the company pay attention to the business process, because that the data, then architecture, any solution is just an instrument, and to become digital, you have to have them simple and very effective process. If you don't have them, so any automation will be absolutely unuseful. And that's my personal opinion. Pay attention to the business process. That's why most of the procurement organization today under transformation and other changes. But another point of view, also from my CPOs, that they told me that all these changes will be always from nowadays, because you have to change the process every day, because new technologies, new process, new innovations, startups and other things, they bring new things to the company, and you have to change every day something. And this is the second, I would say, advice, that you have to be very fast in these changes. And you have to have the system and the structure in the company which could upload these changes to the company very fast, like agile. That's maybe two advices from my side.
Ferhat, what do you see from Apsolut's perspective when you're going in to an organization, early in their maturity journey? What are some of the key challenges that you come up against?
Well, Phil, it's as a consultant, of course, I would like to speak about maturity, let's say status. But maybe let's simplify it and look at the oil and gas industry and their requirements. Firstly, mostly they like to have it on premise, what they have. So cloud is still something where they have to use to get it, especially for the regular e-procurement platforms, I would say it. Let's say, as we are mostly doing SAP Ariba projects together with the S4HANA central procurement, and Artem has mentioned one of our lighthouse customers in Europe. What we see is that, first of all, oil and gas procurement is not the way of procurement as we would see it in consumer goods.
Right.
So you have some exploration, you have some drilling, and there are engineers working and ensuring that the construction work, that the engineering and that the operations are running, and procurement is just one part of their job. It's not their core job. So you on the other side, you have a highly centralized procurement department where you have global frame contracts for services, for contractors, for IT service and consultancy, for example. So you need to manage both. On the one side, the small, less procurement expert on the ground. And then you have also the high professional, highly system supported procurement at the headquarters or regional headquarters. So I think that's the challenge they have. And the second thing is that oil and gas industry was also going through M&As, investments, divestments. So there is a huge legacy system. And this fragmentation of the legacy system makes it very difficult to have one single truth of data.
Yeah.
And that brings you also to further issues when you want to evaluate your contract base, when you want to evaluate your spend data. And this is the thing. First of all, clean up your data.
Mm-hmm.
That's the easy recommendation. It's hard to fulfill.
Yeah.
The second,
Agree.
the second thing is look at the business process, and there you need an engine. You really need an engine to just cover the most important procurement process. You can't solve everything with one solution. You need to adapt yourself also to that solution. And this is now the tackle you have in oil and gas. As I said, it's on-prem and cloud, where we have with SAP also a product which is flexible enough. But on the other side, once you have accomplished that, what is your operating model and what's your target operating model? So you come easily to a place, Phil, where you need to differentiate what do you want to offer to your business, what is required from your procurement department, and what does your partner request from you as part of your supplier-customer relationship. So it's not an easy question. Oil and gas industry, they are huge, multi-billion business, mostly international or globally. So the task is rather an endeavor, and I would not see that endeavor ending. It's a continuous task. You have to cope, and you have also be open, as Artem said. You have to be agile to be ready that the things will be maybe changing also in future. But my suggestion is the basic homework needs to be working properly, and that's the business process which we need for our day-to-day procurement operations.
Now, you both spoke about sustainability, and this is coming from an outsider to the oil and gas industry. So I'd love to hear your view on the importance of sustainability right now as a topic, as a driver within the oil and gas industry. Ferhat, maybe you can speak to that first. Like, what do you see? Do you see sustainability becoming more and more important, or is it one of these things that's been important for years, but perhaps a lot of companies haven't been able to take the steps that they wanted to take, and it's now becoming increasingly important?
I mean, if we talk about oil and gas, we have just to accept that sustainability is a big challenge.
Yeah.
Independent of whether what is being communicated into the market, you see that some organizations start to invest in hydrogen fuels, maybe also to some other substitution of the current fuel setup, or you also see that there's an investment of, let's say, having a carbon offset. I think this is part of the story. But initially, we started talking about the transition of the oil and gas industry and the organization. So I think sustainability will lead to a different business model of the organization in the future.
It's opinion from our CPOs who are working together in the CPO think tank, and you know that we invited CPO to discuss the procurement issues in oil and gas last year in 2020 in December was the first meeting, and on this first meeting we decided to define the topic for the discussion for this year, for 2021, and we discussed several topics, and finally only two topics left. So it was data, and another topic is sustainability.
Right.
And CPO decided that sustainability is much more important than the data at the moment.
Interesting.
And they decided to discuss sustainability topic between themselves. And even we organized the action tank, and action tank, it's also we invited also persons from these companies who work under CPO to bring some results and to discuss how we can deliver a mission statement which was defined by CPOs. And CPOs defined the mission, and the mission statement is that how we can work with suppliers to deliver our sustainability goals in our company. And it's mean that for procurement, it's very important to work with suppliers and to get the data from suppliers about their sustainability, how they work with the sustainability, how much CO2 emission was how to say issued by during the production of goods and services, and so on and so on. And this is only one side of this topic, but for me it was a little bit unpredictable, and was really surprised that one of the CPO told me that they missed the talents. It's how to say HR topics in oil and gas companies, and in procurement in particular, due to sustainability. And when I asked him how HR and talents connected to sustainability, and he told me that, again, this is a perception that all the students in university think about oil and gas company as like about this is the dirtiest company in the world in terms of sustainability, and they don't want to work in this company due to this topic. And for me, it was really wow, it's a surprise, because I never thought about this. That could be problem with the talents, with the newcomers to oil and gas industry, but they don't want to go due to this reason. But from other side, so if you go to any website of oil and gas company, the first you will see will be sustainability, because investments depends on sustainability. Some results in year results depends on sustainability as well. So the government became stronger and stronger, and all penalties and so on also based on sustainability KPIs. But there are a huge problem in sustainability because we have no one standard for this. We have no data, common data and so on. And we, like a vendor at the moment, think how we could bring this data in one place. And this is also one of the most often mentioned issues among the CPOs.
It's interesting. It's getting such it has such an importance amongst the CPOs. There's two ways that procurement can get involved from a sustainability perspective, isn't there? One is on the direct side, so it's actually the sourcing of the raw energy ultimately, and also on the indirect side, so having encouraging more sustainable business practices, or the carbon capture and offset, and a variety of things like that. I wonder, and my question kind of to follow up, Ferhat, is when you think about it from the direct side, so actually sourcing, finding new sources of energy, is that an area where procurement has a role today, can have a role in the future? Because I look at that as being one of those existential questions for an organization: is how do you replace the kind of fossil fuels with wind, solar, the things you talked about earlier, as being a really big challenging question for a lot of companies in this space, and whether procurement would be even thought about as being a place within the organization that can play a role in helping the business do that.
Well, Phil, I think the problem today is that the regulatories are not defined yet. We know what is maybe coming to us as a challenge, which we have to implement or to comply, but we don't know yet. And then when I speak to executives in procurement and supply chain, they have all made, let's say, some research. They have seen studies. They also send people out to the market to understand what's going on. But in the end, at least for Europe, we can say that we don't know what the new Act for Sustainability will bring to us. So there is some ambiguity about this, and I think this ambiguity creates further, let's say, risks also for the organization, because for what are you going to prepare yourself? And including the preparation, that you also need to recruit people who are later also implementing that solution in the organization. So I think once the legal framework is being defined, I think then it will also win another traction to comply to any sustainability act, and also to push sustainability much more forward. Because what I see is that procurement managers are looking for substitution for their fuels, looking for e-cars, e-mobility, bringing in a lot of solar energy on the roof, trying to be already today CO2 neutral. And we also see this in the inquiries of our customers, that more and more they want to have a compliant supply chain sustainability act solution, and which we are also working with Artem's team on that. But in the end of the day, nobody really knows what is heading to us. So we want to be sustainable. We want to be also helping our planet, but in the end, it's a regulatory framework which is also pushing us to do the things in a certain way.
Yeah, and sometimes it's absolutely unpredictable for the companies. That also quite challenging. So I know several cases when the governments started pushed companies to deliver this sustainability project earlier than was planned before. So that was I mean, as far as I remember, the case in Netherlands when the government asked to as far as I remember, asked to company to deliver their sustainability goals in 2035 instead of 2055. What does it mean for the company? I mean, huge investments, huge unpredictable investments. And so that I think that should be some communication between oil and gas companies and industry with the different governments.
I just want also to raise the awareness on the past, because just a few years before, when we had the big debate about too much plastics in the oceans and everywhere, there has been already some suppliers in the chemical industry who started to say, hey, look, guys, I have a plastic bag which is combustible. But if you look at the market and at the consumer, and also there was just no demand because it was on the first way too expensive. And the second thing is that there was no push for that. Then suddenly some governments said, okay, we just sell combustible plastic bagging, and then the market was created. And then the demand was increased and it's getting a standard. So I think also today here, even if it's just more wider scope, the regulatories need to be fixed. And then I think our companies are agile enough to comply to that task.
Now, I have one last question that I want to ask. I'm going to ask to both of you. Artem, I'm going to start by asking you, we talked a lot about innovation. You actually talked earlier about procurement can be a partner manager. I think you talked about an example of a CPO that had kind of an innovation budget. Obviously, there's a lot of startups in this space around sustainability. And I wonder if you've got any advice or guidance to any procurement leaders who may be listening in from an oil and gas perspective in terms of, how should we think about working with startups? Like, how can we actively engage with them and encourage them to work with us, perhaps taking down some of the boundaries that some of those startups may feel exist right now, or mitigating some of the risk on the side of the CPO side of the table, the practitioner side of the table?
So from my point of view, first of all, you have to actively seek these startups anyway. For example, in SAP, we have a venture company inside of the company. We call it SAP.io, and we work with different startups who could use our technologies. And a lot of startups today we have around sustainability and data with sustainability. You can ask, for example, SAP, or you can ask any other vendors, big ones. They also, I think, started already with working with different innovations and different startups. This is the first thing. The second thing, why we created this CPO think tank. So we try to organize this experience exchange between CPOs. Because in our CPO think tank at the moment work CPOs from different countries and different regions: North America, Brazil, it's Latin America, Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia. Then I hope that somebody from IPJ will join. And CPO have to exchange experience and have to exchange the knowledge. Of course, today we have several startups and several companies who work with sustainability, and it's quite a popular names and so on. But each and every CPO has their own team, and their own team work with different companies and innovation as well. And the second advice is to exchange the experience and to exchange the knowledge between themselves. Right. And might be set up some, I don't know, it's just an idea, some common database with startups or innovations around sustainability in the industry should be like industry standards, and discuss and fix something. maybe KPIs, maybe data which they would like to get from suppliers and so on and so on. Work together on sustainability. This is the third advice. The first one is to work with vendors. Second one is exchange experience between themselves. And third, work together and to fix all standards in sustainability in the industry, because we have, as you might be know, absolutely different standards today. That's my personal opinion.
It's really interesting that some of these challenges are industry-wide problems or industry-wide challenges where it requires kind of collaboration in a way that may be unusual for procurement organizations to work together, because they're so kind of systemic issues and problems to overcome, as opposed to just looking at it from your company versus the next company. So that knowledge sharing becomes really important. Ferhat, anything else that you'd like to add from your perspective in terms of encouraging procurement teams to work with startups related specifically to sustainability innovation?
Yeah, sure. So we are doing this currently for one of the major oil and gas companies in Europe. So what we have done is we have scouted different startups, also some grown-ups that we also can demonstrate the benefits in a much, maybe also with some stronger reference base. But I think this is also a challenge, Phil, which I would like also to highlight. I mean, in oil and gas industry and sustainability, there is a low maturity of a comprehensive understanding what it means within the procurement process. So you need a mediator who has the knowledge about the procurement process in the oil and gas industry and the technological background, but also the business perspective, because these startups, they are mostly not complying one-to-one to the oil and gas requirements. So what I would recommend to oil and gas industries is, of course, firstly, to look at startups without a clear, let's say, seeking for the oil and gas case, being more open. The second thing is also to be also ready to invest early, but maybe also fail early. That you just push the POCs as fast as you can. Maybe having a special program for startups of 8 to 12 weeks, which is very clearly structured and follows a certain process where the startups can apply for, and also have the transparency what the process would look like. Because when I talk to the startups, they say, we have a good solution for the oil and gas. We have a nice presentation. We are in talks now for several months, but nothing is moving. And this is really a big problem, because you are losing the traction, and the startups, they also have limited capability. And once you need them, maybe your story has to be rewritten, or the startup has also changed topics, which brings again the new recursion of how to find together. So therefore, Phil, I think we need the openness here from the oil and gas to say, even if this is not industry specific, let's try it. And if we try it, let's be structured and fast to understand whether this fits to us or not. And this is, of course, a question of investment, resources, and as I said, the willingness to fail
taking risks or managed risks for sure. And the point that you made there about how startups need to move quickly, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges of a startup when working with a larger organization in any industry, is kind of getting stuck in that cycle of hurry up and wait, lots of bureaucracy, and frankly, whilst the startups may not admit it, they only have limited cash flow, and so there's only so much they can do to wait around before their cash runs out. So they got to go and focus somewhere else, somewhere where there seems to be more movement or more momentum.
Exactly, and that's how, for example, consumer industry is pulling currently the resource of these startups, because they're faster. And that's what I would like to urge. That's the way how we support also our customer and the startups. So it's really a mediation role, where we say, guys, look, that's the perspective of the startup. That's the perspective of oil and gas. We need to fix that. We need to bring them together and having an alignment how to do it in the next weeks and months.
So I know it's about time to wrap up. So first of all, I want to thank you both for your time. It's a fascinating time for the oil and gas industry, as it's really looking to transform, evolve, in real time. My last question that I always ask, and I'm going to ask this first of all to Artem, and it's the easy question. is if listeners today would like to just get to know you a little bit more, reach out and connect with you, where would be the easiest place for them to find you?
For me, of course, so the easiest way to find me is in LinkedIn. Okay. So it's absolutely easy, just Artem Sherekh, and that's it. You will see my profile.
No problem. And Ferhat, for you as well.
Well, I would say that after COVID, it would be a nice place at the beach, where I can invite everyone who is interested to speak with me. But it's the same as like Artem. It's also through LinkedIn.
All right, perfect. Well, what I'll do is I will add both of you the links to your LinkedIn profiles in the show notes page for today's episode. That's going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. And you can, you'll see all of the back catalog for Art of Procurement podcasts right there, including this one. So that's artofprocurement.com/podcast. Well, one last time, I want to thank you, Ferhat. I want to thank you, Artem, for your time today in sharing some of your perspectives and experiences on transformation and sustainability, the role of procurement in all of that within the oil and gas industry. So thank you. I want to thank you for listening into today's episode of The Art of Procurement. To go deeper, including access to transcripts and actionable outtakes from the podcast, join the free level of our AOP Mastermind community. To learn more, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And to find our entire back catalogue of almost 400 episodes, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast.